of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then-Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me. The hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment tells how the Second Amendment was written to protect Georgia's slave patrols. So what makes Trump supporters Trump supporters? Good question, right? Well, Psychology Today did a deep dive into a whole bunch of literature on this and a number of studies and concluded that there were 5 characteristics that crossed right across virtually all Trump supporters. I do a deep dive on these on our video over at thomhartmann.com for the supporters of our program today. But here's essentially what it says. Number 1, they are authoritarians, by and large authoritarian followers. They want a strong father figure to make them feel safe. Number 2, social dominance orientation. They believe in a caste system and they think they should be in the top caste. Number 3, prejudice. They view people of other races poorly. Number 4, intergroup contact. Most of them have never experienced significant contact with people of another race or people, deeply different than them. And number 5, relative deprivation. They feel like they've been screwed. They're not sure why. And Trump tells them, oh, it's those brown people. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So, just at the tail end of the last segment, a caller, now my apologies, I don't recall her name, but a caller had asked what I think is really one of the most important questions, and that is, how is it that people fall for this BS that the Republicans are shoveling at them? That's not the way she said it, but that's, and I think in particular, right now, probably the one segment of our population that's really falling under the spell of this are first-generation Hispanics who still speak Spanish, and or who also speak Spanish, shall we say. And the reason I say that is because this is a phenomenon that's happening right now on Spanish language radio. All over the country, there are Spanish language radio stations in pretty much every town and community. And they are being bought up or leased by these people with right-wing agendas, and they're being turned into the Spanish language equivalent of Rush Limbaugh, right-wing talk radio in English. And the sales pitch that they're selling right now to Hispanics, to Latinx folks, is essentially the sales pitch that Reagan sold all the rest of us back in the 1980s. And it goes something like this. The Democrats want to give you a can of tuna fish. In fact, this is the actual example that they're using on Spanish radio. The Democrats want to give you a can of tuna fish and tell you that if you want any more tuna fish, you better vote for more Democrats, and then they'll keep giving you the tuna fish. Whereas Republicans want to teach you how to fish, so that you can get your own fish. Remember this? I mean, this was like the premier conservative talking point 40 years ago. And it's being recycled right now, and we're watching the numbers. I mean, it's fascinating to watch. Hispanic support for Republicans has almost doubled in the last 2 or 3 months. And it's because of this particular message. And what it boils down to is that there are 2 ways to define freedom. The conservative definition of freedom is basically, on the one side, you're on your own, and on the other side, or on the other hand, and that's a good thing because if you're on your own, you can, the sky's the limit and you can accomplish whatever you want. And it's, this is the kind of Norman Vincent Peale idea. And there's a lot of merit to the idea that, we should all individually and collectively be able to strive for and achieve our highest potential, and that the job of government shouldn't be to just give us a can of tuna fish. It should be to, help us out, help us figure out how to become prosperous and wealthy and successful. And that success prosperity gospel that the Republicans have been selling is something that, people who are trying to figure out how do I achieve success in America are very vulnerable to. The Democratic argument has been, over the last 40, 50, 60 years, really not addressing that issue.
The last time Democrats really addressed that issue in a way that made sense to the average American was in the 1930s and 40s, when Franklin Roosevelt repeatedly, he said this in his inaugural address in 1932, he said it in his New York Times Square, or Madison Square Garden, speech in 1936 when he accepted the Republican nomination for his second term as president. He said, an old judge once said, a necessitous man is not a free man. In other words, you're not free if you are in need of core necessities. You are not free if you are homeless. Now, Republicans can say all day long, oh, you know, it's a shame you're homeless. I'll tell you how to start saving your money so you can buy a house. No, you're not free if you're homeless. You're not free if you're hungry and don't have access to food, Franklin Roosevelt said. Which is why we started programs like food stamps. We started programs like housing support that Ben Carson is trying to gut right now with HUD because you're not free if you don't have housing. You're not free to reach the top of your potential if you don't have access to education. Franklin Roosevelt laid this out in his second Bill of Rights. Everybody should have free college. Everybody should have, access to housing. Everybody should have a guaranteed wage that is decent. Everybody should have access to free health care. Yes, Franklin Roosevelt laid that out in 1940. I think it was 1943 or 44. No, it was 44 in his second Bill of Rights speech. And it's really worth checking out and looking up. So basically what Democrats have been saying is, if you want to be successful in America, we're going to provide you with a launching pad. We're going to, make sure that you don't fall below this point, that sickness isn't going to stop you from being successful, because we'll cover you if you get sick. That a lack of education isn't going to stop you from being successful, because we'll make sure you can get that education. That a lack of a job isn't going to stop you from being successful, because if you can't find a job, we'll provide you with one, a government job as a job of last resort. Or we will, at the very least, cover you while you're unemployed with unemployment benefits. Now, Republicans have said to all those things, no, that's a bad thing. Those are all bad things. Because if you have free college, you don't value it and you won't pay attention in class. If you have free health care, you're just going to sit in the doctor's office all day and beg for drugs. And if you have, free housing, you're not going to value it, and you're not going to shoot for the stars. And the real truth encompasses a little bit of both of these, but they are, in particular, the Republican message is one that is absolutely rigid. It's if you need charity, that should be provided by churches and wealthy individuals, not by government. And, if you are concerned about becoming successful in America, you need to learn to fish, not take a can of tuna fish from the Democrats. And the Democrats are saying, we'll give you the can of tuna fish so that you can have enough nutrition to go to work and make enough money to make yourself successful so you can buy your tuna fish in the future yourself, if I'm making sense. So anyway, I think it's really important to note that these are the dueling stories that we've had in the United States for well over 100 years about who we are and what the real purpose of government is. And I think that the reason, and I think Democrats have really fallen down on the job in terms of defining freedom. Franklin Roosevelt defined freedom very, very clearly. You are free if you can stand on your own 2 feet, because government has helped support you to the point where you can stand on your own 2 feet, and then you march forward. And the Republicans have said, hey, you're not on your own 2 feet? Tough luck. In fact, we're going to cause you even greater pain as a way of trying to incentivize you. This was the debate, the Republican primary debate, when Ron Paul said, when Anderson Cooper said, well, you got a 30-year-old guy who didn't bother to buy health insurance, and he got hit by a car right in front of the hospital, and he's laying there bleeding. What should happen? And Ron Paul goes into this long riff about how when he was a doctor back in the 50s, he used to get paid with chickens. I mean, that's their story, essentially, is tough luck, you're on your own. And that is supposed to encourage you to become successful. Well, some small percentage of people it does encourage, but the vast majority of people it wounds terribly. And if we don't understand the sales pitch that Republicans are making, that conservatives are making, we can't counter it. But this is one that the billionaire class, the very, very wealthy, have loved for a long, long time. They are believers in neo-Calvinism. John Calvin, came along and said, God has chosen, before the beginning of the earth, God chose who was going to be successful, who was a good person, and who wasn't, who was an evil person. And how do you know who's a good person? Who should be running things? Who should be ruling things? Who should be making decisions for society? They're rich. That's the proof of God's blessing. And this new kind of Calvinism is the principal underpinning of the Republican worship of great wealth. Anyhow, enough of that rant. I'll pick up your phone calls right after this. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here as we defend America from the conservative weapons of mass deception. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with your calls in just a moment, and then for our third hour, Ann Nelson will be with us to talk about her new book, Shadow Network, which I think you're going to find pretty shocking. And welcome back. Joan in Rochester, Minnesota. Hey, Joan, what's on your mind today?
Well, I just wanted to know if you agreed with me. All of Trump's people wear the hats saying, "Make America Great Again," but he never says what he's talking about, and I think he's referring back before Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president and put in Social Security, unions, and health care. And that's exactly what he's talking about, and that's what I feel like he's talking about, but nobody's ever asked him, what date are you talking about? What time are you talking about? What time in this country are you referring to? And since they're trying to get rid of all those things, I think they're wearing hats that's going to put them right in a heck hole in this country with nothing to help the people that need the most help in the country. And
Joan, I'm sorry. Go finish your thought.
Well, I just had one other thing I was thinking about. Since when do the employees, which is the government and the senators and all of them, tell the employers, who are all the hundreds, thousands of millions of Americans, since when do the employees tell the employers what to do? And that's how I feel. I feel like it's all turned upside down. The whole world's turned upside down.
Well, it has to some extent. And although, we have to acknowledge that we do elect them to tell us what to do at a certain level, but we assume that they're going to tell us what to do along policy lines that we all agree on. But back to your question about, when somebody's wearing a MAGA hat, what point in time the great again, what point in time are they referring to? I think it means different things to different people. I think that.
But what does he mean? But what does Trump mean by it? That's the big question.
I'm not sure that he's that thoughtful. When he started his campaign, they tested a bunch of different things. They tested, the wall, build a wall. And Trump said, nobody's going to go for that. And they tested it, and the crowds loved it. They tested some various slogans, and what they found was that Make America Great Again was the slogan that polled the best with Republican voters. And, I think it was just a poll-tested slogan that they've rolled out, and I don't think Trump gives it that much thought. In terms of when America was great, the way that Trump is defining it, I think was, the 1950s. It was when he was growing up, when he was a little kid. And it was the 1950s in his mind because black people were, quote, in their place. The rights were withheld. We had legal segregation in the United States. By and large, black people could not vote, could not participate in civic governments, were kept out of most reasonable job opportunities, all those kind of things. And society was largely white. Television was entirely white. Movies were entirely white. The only time you saw black faces or faces of any non-white color were when they were characterized negatively, either as bad guys or as fools or minstrels or whatever. So I think for Donald Trump, and that's why yesterday in one of his rallies he was talking about, housewives, I'm going to put your husbands back to work, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to keep those black people out of your neighborhoods. Don't worry. I think that's the time that he's looking at. But I think that a lot of the billionaires who support him, I'm with you. They want to go back pre-New Deal and do away with not just Medicare and Medicaid, but Social Security as well. Joan, thank you for the call. Great to hear from you. We'll be right back. Daily rants and weekly op-eds at HartmannReport.com. It's free and there's no ads. HartmannReport.com. So we have a new video up for people who are supporters of the Thom Hartmann Program. Specifically, it's over at ThomHartmann.com, talking about language, how we use language. Language matters tremendously. And we have chosen as a society, as a culture, as media, as political leadership, et cetera, not to refer to people like Steve Mnuchin, who threw thousands of people out of their homes illegally during the banking crisis, as looters, not to refer to Rex Tillerson, whose oil company has ravaged much of the third world, literally destroying people's lives, killing people, poisoning people. We don't refer to them as looters. We don't refer to the police who go into neighborhoods and kill people, minorities, particularly African Americans. We don't refer to them as looters, stealing their lives. But when black people rise up and say, no, enough, we call them looters. There's something wrong with this. Check it out. It's at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Kent in Eagle Point. Hey, Kent, what's on your mind today?
Yeah. Hey, I was just curious about if, in fact, we do lose, we win the House, White House, and the Senate. What's the viability of making Medicare people eligible for Medicare at birth? If they're gonna take it away, just do that.
Yeah, I mean, Biden is actually suggesting something like that. It's a halfway measure, but it's kind of Buttigieg's, or for that matter, President Obama's. It's what Obama campaigned on and would have had if it wasn't for Joe Lieberman taking over $1 million from the insurance industry and selling out his Democratic colleagues, which was the public option, which is anybody who wants Medicare can get Medicare. And on the other hand, if you want to have private health insurance, you can have private health insurance. And I suspect that that's a backdoor, and this is why Republicans are so opposed to it. It's a backdoor way into Medicare and into Medicare for all. And so I think that we'll get there. I don't think that they're going to do a Bernie-style Medicare for all right away. I think that'll be probably 3, 4, 5 years down the road. But I think the public option is going to be a good start. Kent, thanks for the call. Randy in Middlesboro, Kentucky. Hey, Randy, what's up?
How's it going, Tom? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. I got one example. This is it. You always ask if a Republican has ever done anything for their people. And it's a mayor in Texas, from Georgetown, Texas, Dale Ross. He took his city completely off the grid, and they are now on solar power and I believe wind power as well. And his population is 67,000 people. That's it.
Is that the town that got wiped out by the tornado and some Hollywood folks came in and helped them out? Or that was in Kansas, wasn't it? I guess I'm thinking of
No. Wasn't that didn't that start like a J?
Yeah.
That was a couple years back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, Randy.
2018. This is the best I got for your
for my contest. Okay, my contest, by the way, is if you can name one law that was proposed by
I'm out.
Republicans, passed by Republicans, whose principal benefit is the average working person, you win the award. But hey, I'd love to know more about this Republican mayor and maybe even have him on the air. Randy, can you tweet information about that to me?
Smithsonian Magazine article here. It is a couple years old. It's from April 2018.
Tweet it to me.
Let's see what I looked up.
Tweet it to me. I'll check it out. Okay,
sure.
I got to run. I want to let a few more phone callers in here. Randy, thank you for the call. Brian in Middletown, New Jersey. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking a call. Listen, I just want to get people prepared for something that's coming out tomorrow, the third quarter GDP numbers, which are going to look very good. But if you look at it in context, they're not good because it's a year-over-year thing. But I can tell you right now, Trump is going to run with that. You're going to be hearing about it from tomorrow when it comes out, right through Tuesday, indicating that only he can help us recover economically from COVID. The one problem I see with the way the Democrats are responding to this election is they haven't gotten the message out, in my opinion, strongly enough that the Republicans historically are not better for the economy. 10 straight Republican presidents, 10 recessions. It's a BS story that they're better, but people believe in it, and we've got to do a better job of countering that narrative.
I agree, Brian. And on the GDP numbers, you're absolutely right. When they report these numbers, they report the raw quarterly number, but they emphasize what's called the annualized number, which is basically a quarterly number multiplied by 4. So if you've seen GDP go up 5% in the quarter, which is not impossible at all since GDP dropped by, 20% initially? So if it goes up 5%, they'll say, we've got a 20% annual, increase. Or if it goes up by 8%, it's a 32% annual increase in GDP. Isn't that wonderful? And everybody's going to go, whoa, And you're absolutely right, Brian. Trump will be running with that, and it will be pretty deceptive. Thanks a lot for the call. Harry in how do you say that, Tom?
Arizona, Arizona.
Okay, what's up? We have just 1 minute, Harry. Quick one.
Okay. Well, what you were talking about, psychopathy in society, and I think that's very true. That goes directly to why police shoot to kill rather than using other options on people with other problems. And like yesterday, it would have been much better if they had a tranquilizer gun for such a thing.
Or a taser even.
Yeah, but we use tranquilizers on a bear, but we can't use it on a person. Yeah. So it'll put them down. But they don't do that way. And then our welfare system.
Or even just a big net.
Yeah, and also it relates to our welfare system. I think our society has picked up on the psychopathy, and the people don't have any empathy for anybody anymore. And so welfare is broken because what you said, the fish, give the fish and teach the fish. Well, the problem is we give somebody an education in the welfare program, and when they get a job, we take away their child care. And so then they have to go back. And there's nothing, our welfare system needs to have some empathy also.
Yeah, I agree, Harry. We need to strengthen our social safety net. Thank you for the call. We'll be back with Ann Nelson about the Shadow Network.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. More info at teethhealth.com, code Tom. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code Tom. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom.
It's Thom Hartmann. We're reading from A Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right in today's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. This is from Chapter 11, page 271. The official opening of the 112th Congress took place on January 5th, 2011, when Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, handed off an oversized ceremonial gavel to her successor, John Boehner. But a new era of ultra-conservative billionaire influence had already begun. Before the public swearing-in ceremony got underway, David Koch, whose donor network had spent at least $130.7 million on winning a Republican majority, was in the new Speaker-to-be's office, ornate office, chatting amiably with his staff. The People's House was under new management, and critics would suggest new ownership. While Koch was a very public presence on the Capitol, his political adjutant, Tim Phillips, the president of Americans for Prosperity, was deep in the inner sanctum of the congressional committee that mattered most to the bottom line of Koch Industries. Phillips's most important destination that day was the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which under the new Republican majority had now increased its power to block President Obama's environmental agenda in Congress. The committee could bury progress on climate change and harass the EPA for the foreseeable future. And then just jumping through a little anecdote about Lee Fong and David Koch, they continue. In Plutocrats, the rise of the new global super-rich and the fall of everyone else, journalist Krista Freeland describes how those with massive financial resources almost universally use them to secure politics and policies beneficial to their interests, often at the expense of the less well-off. In the United States, a number of studies have shown that in recent years, this tendency has distorted politics in very specific ways. In a study he conducted for the nonpartisan Sunlight Foundation, the political scientist Lee Drutman found that increasingly concentrated wealth in America resulted in more polarization and extremism, especially on the right. Very rich benefactors in the Republican Party were far more opposed to taxes and regulations than the rest of the country. He discovered the more Republicans depend upon 1% of the 1% donors, the more conservative they tend to be. The 112th Congress soon unfolded as a case study of what David Frum, an advisor to the former President George W. Bush, described as the growing and, in his view, destructive influence of the Republican Party's radical rich. The radicalization of the party's donor base, he observed, has propelled the party to advocate policies that were more extreme than anything since Barry Goldwater and his 1964 presidential campaign. It also led Republicans in Congress to try tactics they would never have dared use before, end quote. Hard data supported this. Harvard's Theta Scup poll found that the House took the biggest leap to the far right since political scientists began recording quantitative measurements of legislators' positions. There was no better example than the Koch's newly won influence over the House Energy and Commerce Committee. In the previous Congress, the panel had been chaired by Henry Waxman, the liberal Democrat from California, who had quarterbacked the House's successful passage of the cap and trade bill, only to see it die in the Senate. Now the new Republican leadership stocked the committee with oil industry advocates, many of whom owed huge campaign debts to the Kochs. Koch Industries PAC was the single largest oil and gas industry donor to members of the panel, outspending even ExxonMobil. It had donated to 22 of the committee's 31 Republican members and 5 of its Democratic members, too. In addition, 5 out of the 6 Republican freshmen on the committee had received outside support from Americans for Prosperity. Meanwhile, many of the new committee members had signed an unusual pledge swearing fealty to the Koch's agenda. They promised to vote against any kind of carbon tax unless it was offset by comparable spending cuts, an unlikely scenario. The No Climate Tax pledge was invented by Americans for Prosperity in 2008, when the Supreme Court cleared the way for the EPA to regulate greenhouse gases as it does other pollutants. The Koch's pledge was modeled on the enormously successful one that the anti-tax crusader Grover Norquist had used to intimidate Republican lawmakers from raising taxes. But in this instance, it served not a cause so much as a company. By the start of the legislative session in 2011, fully 156 members of Congress had signed the Koch brothers' No Climate Tax pledge. Many returning members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee had already taken the pledge, and of the 12 new Republicans on the panel, 9 were signatories, including 5 of the 6 freshmen. A prime example of the symbiotic relationship between the Kochs and the committee was Morgan Griffith, who had defeated Rick Boucher in the district that represented Saltville, Virginia, and was among the new wave of appointees to the Energy and Commerce Committee who were openly indebted to the Koch brothers for their seats. Americans for Prosperity operatives were guests of honor at a victory rally soon after the election, at which Griffith gushed, quote,
I'm just thankful that you all helped me out in so many ways, end quote. The Koch's investment soon paid off. Once in office, Griffith became an outspoken skeptic of mainstream climate science, drawing national ridicule for lecturing scientific experts as they testified before Congress that they needed to consider the possibility that Mesopotamia and the Vikings owed their success to global warming, and the melting ice caps on Mars showed that humans were not its cause on Earth. Congressman Griffith became a lead player in the House Republicans' war on the EPA, demanding that the agency be reined in. Within a month after he took office, he and other House Republicans gutted the EPA budget by a punishing 27%. Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right by Jane Mayer.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We are going to spend this entire hour, something that we have done occasionally over the years for really, truly extraordinary efforts. Ann Nelson has written an extraordinary book. Our Conversations of Great Minds conversation here for this hour. The book is called Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. Ann Nelson is a journalist, an adjunct professor of international public affairs, and adjunct research scholar at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs. She's also a fellow Project Censored Award winner for her reporting work back in El Salvador. I've gotten 4 of those Project Censored Awards, and Ann is also a winner. Ann-Nelson.com, spelled just like I say, ANNE-Nelson.com is her website, and ANELSONA is her Twitter handle. Ann, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for writing this book. I'm really glad you could be with us.
Yes, my pleasure.
So let's start at the beginning. In fact, I'd like to start prior to the beginning. Back when you were in your 20s, you were a reporter in Central America, and you saw the influence of the American right and the Central American right. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that informed your worldview and perhaps led you to write this book, if it did?
Oh, well, yes, I was in my 20s, so I was lacking in experience, but I was a witness to war crimes. And I was witnessing the fact that the Reagan administration was supporting death squads in El Salvador and Contras in Nicaragua that were murdering entire villages. In Nicaragua, I went and saw the results of a Contra attack on a daycare center where children were killed in a village called Fantasma. So it obviously made a very deep impression on me. And when I came back to the United States, as, again, a 20-something-year-old reporter, I just thought, my country can't possibly be supporting these things. This is not who we are. And then I found out that there were all of these subterranean groups that were filtering money and support and governmental lobbying for the death squads. And for Roberto D'Aubuisson, who had planned the assassination of Archbishop Romero in El Salvador. Since then, Romero has been named a saint by the Catholic Church. So it was a real education by fire.
So to what extent are the people who were advocating covert American support, and I suspect some of it was overt as well, it certainly was hitting the news occasionally, but particularly the covert American support for right-wing death squads and to overthrow more left-wing governments in Central America. This was in the 80s during the Reagan administration. The CPN started in 81, if I'm recalling from your book. Is there an overlap between those folks, and if so, why and how?
Absolutely. You had a bunch of extremely conservative Republicans. I mean, we're talking about the radical right. And the Council for National Policy started in 1981, and they were going to be a real foothold for the the aggressive foreign policy that was going to be extended, where it looked at every shadow in the corner as a communist plot. And that included church people. It included Catholic priests and nuns, including the American nuns who were murdered in El Salvador. And at the time, I was not aware of how all the mechanics worked. So what you had with the Council for National Policy in 1981 already was a director named Woody Jenkins, who had been a politician from Louisiana. He got involved with a group called Friends of the Americas. They were funneling money and support to the Contras and other people in the violent right wing of Central America. They got caught up in the Iran-Contra scandal. Oliver North, some of us may remember that name from the past, was a figure that was involved with this group from the beginning and still is. So they were there, but it kind of took me 20 years to unravel all of the schemes of what I was observing on the ground in those days.
I think most Americans have never heard of the CPN, the Council for Policy Network?
Council for National Policy.
Council for National Policy, thank you, CNP. And see, this is how, I mean, and I've written about this stuff. I haven't written about CNP specifically, but, you know, I consider myself fairly well informed. And a lot of what I read in your book was new to me. You know, I knew all about Paul Weyrich, and, I knew who these guys were, but they've done an extraordinarily good job of flying below the radar. Lay out for us exactly what the Council for National Policy is, how they started, who started it, and who's running it now. This is not a large organization. As I recall, you wrote in your book there were 400 members at the moment, more or less?
Well, at any given time, when we can get access to their membership list, it's around 400, between 400 and 500 people. But a lot of people move in and out, and they appear to have members who are listed in their newsletter who aren't listed in their membership roster. So they've kept all of this hidden. And I want to say there's a good reason you can't remember the name. I'm convinced that they chose the most forgettable name they could identify. So the Council for National Policy. I was researching this sucker for a year before I could make the name stick in my mind. That is how intentionally obscure they are. Now, for those of you who know anything about nonprofit organizations, they're a 501c3, or by the IRS's standards, a charity. So they're supposed to be for nonpartisan, educational, and charitable use. They're a political organization. They're as partisan as it comes. And I have no idea how the IRS has overlooked its activities all of these years and not held them to account. Their executive director, Bob McEwen, at a recent meeting, described them as a consortium of givers. So what they do is they pull together people who can write big checks for political purposes, the major donors, and these have included a lot of people from the fossil fuel world, and the DeVos family of Michigan, whom you might be familiar with. Foster Friess is another one. There are some investment bankers in the picture. And they fund strategists who create messaging and campaigns. And they place these campaigns on their media partners. And the media partners help to organize their so-called grassroots organizations. So these groups, which include the National Rifle Association, the Anti-Abortion Susan B. Anthony List, and many, many others, present themselves to the professional media as expressions of the people. Well, they're not. They're top-down creations that are paid for and organized and strategized and messaged by this machine. So you have the pieces of this machine coming to light on the front pages and the individuals connected with it on almost a daily basis. But it has been very difficult to peek behind the curtain and see how the gears turn. In terms of who organized it, it was people who were frustrated by the failure of the Barry Goldwater campaign back in the day. And as you mentioned, Paul Weyrich was one of them, and his masterstroke was to co-found the Council for National Policy the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is all about manufacturing laws on a state level, and the Heritage Foundation, which is a think tank which crafts policies and then pushes them out into their network. Paul Weyrich was involved with the creation of all three of those, and they were supposed to work together from the beginning, and they have. The other two
extraordinary stuff. I think we're hitting a break here right now. Forgive my interrupting you, Ann, but I'm pretty sure we're in a break. We'll be right back with Ann Nelson. Her new book is Shadow Network. You got to check this out.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Shadow Network, media, money, and the secret hub of the radical right. More with Ann Nelson in just a moment. And welcome back. Ann, we're just continuing our conversation here. We have our commercial affiliates, SiriusXM, and our commercial radio stations around the country are in commercial break right now. But we're still on our nonprofit stations on Pacifica Network, on Free Speech TV all over the country. Still have about half our audience. So anything that we talk about here, we'll recap very quickly after the break. But was the original idea that Weyrich and these guys, when they put this thing together, to simply pull together a bunch of rich folks and take over American politics? I mean, was it that simple? Or am I missing something here?
No, because money is not enough by itself. And that was the big lesson they took from the Democrats. There's this moment of this epiphany that they had when they looked at Democrats from the civil rights movement and the fair housing people and the feminists getting together and saying, oh, how do we collaborate? And they said, oh, the right doesn't do that. So they pulled this group together with a master plan. And the master plan was pretty much to take over the culture and to take over the country. I mean, and Weyrich oversaw a memorandum that stated this in so many words. It was, we have to wage guerrilla warfare on the culture and install right-wing values. We have to overcome the universities and the institutions of knowledge, and we have to basically undermine the federal government, its agencies, and its programs. So he needed partners for this. And Richard Viguerie, who more or less invented direct mail for political purposes, was his partner, and then Morton Blackwell, who designed a lot of training programs and recruitment programs for national candidates and campaign managers. The three of them were really the godfathers of this organization.
It sounds an awful lot like the Powell memo, which was written in 1971. Lewis Powell, the tobacco industry lawyer that Richard Nixon put on the Supreme Court the next year, wrote this memo to Eugene Sindor Jr., the head of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, laying out, we've got to take over the schools, we've got to take over the courts, we've got to take over the media, we've got to create think tanks, all that kind of stuff. How much overlap is there between these two organizations?
Well,
or between the Powell memo and the creation of CNP?
Exactly. I haven't seen that the Powell memo led to an organization per se, but the thinking is very, very resonant, and I think that there was absolutely mutual influence. And I think that there were these groups in Washington and beyond that were all on the same page looking at how to work together. So you look at these organizations, for example, recently with the whole confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett, people say, oh, well, the Federalist Society was involved in promoting her. And, oh, there's this thing called the Judicial Crisis Network that has paid for all of these ads. Well, they're all tied together. It's the same donors. It's the same founders. And they appear in the media as separate voices, but they're singing in tune. It's
pretty remarkable. There's a lot of coverage right now about Leonard Leo and his organization getting $80 million in dark money that they've spent to put these three judges on the court. Well, we'll pick up this conversation on the other side of this break. I've got to read a commercial here on the commercial side of our program, so we'll be back in about a minute and a half. Ann Nelson is with us. Shadow Network is her book, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. Stick around. So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for the folks who support our program, and it's about exactly why rich people, I'm talking about people who make more than $1 million a year marginally, and over $3 million a year, you know, that group totally, why this group of people who are multi-millionaires and are making, literally bringing into the house over $1 million a year and over $3 million a year, why would they want to destroy Obamacare? Turns out there's a very simple answer, and a very straightforward answer, and a rather shocking answer, that they would put all this time and effort, years of work, into trying to kill Obamacare and throw 20, 30, 40,000 people, million people, excuse me, off their health care. And you can see it, hear it, read all about it, as it were, over at thomhartmann.com in our new members-only video. You can help America return to democracy by telling friends and family how to listen to this and other great progressive programs. Tag You're It. Welcome back. We're talking with Ann Nelson. She's the author of a brilliant new book, Shadow Network, the Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. And we were just talking about how this, you know, there's so much attention been paid to the Powell memo in 1971 over the years, but almost nobody has been paying attention to the Council for National Policy, which Paul Weyrich and these other folks started back in 1981, the first year of the Reagan administration. And you were talking about how the Federalist Society and the Judicial Crisis Network, which have funneled tens of millions of dollars of money where we have no idea who the donors were, into massive television advertising campaigns and massive campaign contributions, apparently, to Republican members of the Senate to get Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh and now Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court. To what extent are organizations like the Federalist Society, the Judicial Crisis Network, aligned with the Council for National Policy, or subordinate to or subsets of the CNP?
Leonard Leo, who was until very recently the head of the operating vice president of the Federal Society, has been a long-term leading member of the Council for National Policy. So he's been in this strain of right-wing Catholics who have been promoting their agenda and using the Council for National Policy for their networking. In 2005, he and several other people involved with the Council for National Policy, including Trump's lawyer, Jay Sekulow, right, and Ed Meese, whom we remember from the Reagan administration, along with C. Boyden Gray, co-founded what became the Judicial Crisis Network, right, 2005. The head of the Judicial Crisis Network, Carrie Severino, is now on the executive committee of the Council for National Policy. So it's absolutely interwoven. And as I said, they promote themselves as being separate voices, but they're working in absolute coordination. And not only that, the secret to their success, I believe, is their ability to execute long-term strategies. So, for example, the Judicial Crisis Network, which has renamed itself as the Concord Fund, purchased the domain name of Confirm Barrett, right, for Amy Coney Barrett in November 2017.
Whoa.
3 years ago.
So this is serious long-term planning. They've done the same thing for a few other federal judges, right?
Oh, absolutely. They've had their own pipeline, which runs straight through the Federalist Society, where they select and groom these individuals, and they promote them not based on their qualifications as judges, I'm afraid, because there's, you look at Merrick Garland and his qualifications versus Amy Coney Barrett's, and there's no comparison. I mean, just in terms of their careers, their education, their achievements, it's really a pipeline that rests on ideology. And as an American citizen, it breaks my heart because the politicization of the judiciary is really a danger to our democracy.
Right, and she'd only been a judge for 3 years, and the only reason she was a judge was because when President Obama nominated a highly qualified African-American woman for a position in the Seventh Circuit Court, Mitch McConnell refused to process that application, that nomination in the Senate for a year, And as a result, that seat was left open. And as soon as Trump came in, McConnell put Amy Coney Barrett in that seat to set her up for this. One of the big questions that I've kind of struggled with through this, or I just do in general, is the question of why. You mentioned in your book, you talk about John Calvin. And Calvin, the Protestant church back in the day was struggling with the question, if we're all evil because we're all born of women and Eve ate the apple, and all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, then how do we figure out who the good people are who can lead us? How do we come up with leaders? And Calvin's answer, or at least the answer of his followers to that question was, well, God has told us who he loves. This was all preordained before the creation of the world. And we can see that in the visible evidence of God's blessings, that is, they are rich. I mean, is it that simple that these people are neo-Calvinists and they actually believe that rich equals good and good equals an obligation or a need to rule?
I think it is for some of them, and I would point to the DeVos and the Prince families, because they come from a branch. They are literal, they're right-wing fringe Calvinists. So the idea is that God rewards the worthy with prosperity, and he punishes the unworthy who are going to hell anyway by making them poor. And of course, this kind of misses out on a lot of what goes on in human history and society. But if you subscribe to those values, I suppose you can take a winner-take-all attitude and say, we deserve to have the entire pie, because those are the rules they play by.
That's remarkable. We have to take about a 5-minute break here at the bottom of the hour so our commercial stations can do their news break, and non-commercial will fill it with a book report. We will be back on the other side of this with Ann Nelson finishing the hour with us. Her new book, Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. If you have not read this book or not heard about this book, get a copy now. It's mind-boggling. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with Ann Nelson about her new book, Shadow Network, right after this.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Point to Point Navigation, a memoir by Gore Vidal. This is from the last 2 chapters, and we're reading from page 258. In 1961, a new president of the United States, John F. Kennedy, was inaugurated at the age of 43. With him, a new generation had taken the crown from the older generation as represented by General Eisenhower. There was triumphant talk of a new frontier, presumably to be crossed by all of us into a bright new land where the only shadow that marred the prospect was that of the hideous, murderous specter of international communism centered upon the Soviet Union, against whom JFK had sworn to bear any burden to ensure the ultimate victory of freedom, liberty, and so on. But early on, starting in 1959, under the general direction of then Vice President Richard Nixon, who had many interesting Cuban mob connections. Yes, Bibi Rebozo, his mysterious friend, was also linked not only to mobsters, but to the Cuban dictator Batista, who had been overthrown by Fidel Castro, to the annoyance of the mob, an annoyance that turned to fury when Castro shut down, if only briefly, the mafia-run Havana casinos. Elements of the CIA were soon attempting to murder Castro, who, like all Nixon enemies, was, if not yet a communist, worst, a communist dupe. The presidential election of 1960 was a close one, fought by Nixon and John Kennedy, an attractive Massachusetts senator whose father had, ironically, dealings with many mobsters during the pre-World War II period, as well as at the time of the prohibition of alcohol. The late film producer Ray Stark told me how, during the short presidency of JFK, Joe Kennedy and Frank Costello, the retired New York mob overlord, would often have dinner at Kennedy's Central Park South apartment and rehash old crimes, often in the country of a retired teamster who gave great massages. Joe's mob connections were useful to Jack in the 1960 election and could easily have saved JFK's life in 1963 had Bobby Kennedy, in the interest of building himself up in the public eyes, not started arresting important mobsters, particularly in the so-called Appalachian Mob Conference, bust, where they had all come together to confer about the secession of the leadership of the New York mob. I've long since forgotten how I first heard of the plot to kill JFK, while I had no idea at all of the Kennedy brothers' plot to kill Castro on December 1st, 1963, until I read a recent book by Lamar Waldron and Thom Hartmann called Ultimate Sacrifice. It was assumed that the Cuban Missile Crisis of '62 had sufficiently alarmed JFK and Castro's mentor Khrushchev so that they jointly backed down, putting an end, so everyone thought, to such dangerous adventures. JFK had pledged not to invade Cuba if Castro would allow inspections of any remaining missiles on the island. Since Castro did not cooperate, JFK then regarded his pledge as inoperative. In the spring of 1963, according to Ultimate Sacrifice, more a literal than an ironic title, John and Robert Kennedy started laying the groundwork for a coup against Fidel Castro that would eventually be set for what they called C-Day, December 1st, 1963. Bobby, like Nixon before him, was in charge of what would be the most secretive operation of its sort in our history. Since the CIA had, in the eyes of the Kennedys, botched the 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion, the Department of Defense was to be in charge of this adventure, which would first engage mob hitmen to assassinate Castro and then replace Castro with a provisional government that would implore the United States to come to its aid and restore order. Ours is a society riddled with plots of every kind, from, let's say, one to bribe certain members of Congress to cheat Indians of their casino money, to the financing, often secretly, of numerous presidential elections, while simultaneously great companies like Enron cheat customers, stockholders, and employees. Yet everyone who draws attention to all of this corruption is quickly denounced as a conspiracy theorist who means to undo the great fiction that anything truly wicked, at least in the murder line, must be the work of a solitary lone nut who is simply evil. Hence the setting up of Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone crazed killer of JFK, despite his own brief but presumably accurate statement after his Dallas arrest, "I'm the patsy." Then, as planned, his being gunned down by Jack Ruby, a fellow CIA asset. Oswald as lone killer for no reason at all, and addled Ruby, a one-time Chicago mobster who claimed to be deeply worried about the stress all this must be causing the widow Kennedy. And he goes on in chapter 55. Ultimate Sacrifice describes how the Kennedy C-Day plan was penetrated by three mafia godfathers: Carlos Marcello, New Orleans, Santo Trafficante, Tampa, Florida, and Johnny Roselli out of Chicago. All three were being vigorously pursued by Attorney General Robert Kennedy, along with a dozen of their associates, of whom 6 were also working on the Castro murder case. The crime bosses then used parts of the C-Plan, a.k.a. AM World, to arrange JFK's assassination in a way that would prevent a thorough government investigation in order to protect the coup plan, its participants, as well as, naturally, national security by invoking the secrecy surrounding the C-Plan. The mob bosses targeted JFK twice before Dallas, once in Chicago on November 2nd, JFK called off his motorcade, and then in Tampa on November 18th. He survived unscathed. Ultimate Sacrifice reveals and details why Robert Kennedy later told several close associates the name of the godfather, Carlos Marcello, who had ordered his brother killed. But he couldn't do anything about it for fear the Soviets might go to war. Ironic and tragic action. I recalled when over the years I'd asked why what happened at Dallas happened, I'd answer, because Bobby had broken a truce made with the mob by Joe Kennedy in 1960. The book, Point-to-Point Navigation by Gore Vidal.
The hidden history of the war on voting tells how the GOP has been stealing elections for decades and will again this year unless we stop them.
So we just put up a new video for our the supporters of our program. It's over at ThomHartmann.com, or the links to it are over at ThomHartmann.com. And basically what I was talking about in it is, kind of starting with the old saying from the late 60s, early 70s, what if they gave a war and no one came? What if a bunch of right-wing thugs showed up itching for a fight and were completely ignored? Historically, one of the most powerful ways to put someone down, essentially, is to shun them. In fact, expelling people from communities among indigenous people is one of the worst punishments that there was. You turn your back on a dog when it's misbehaving, and it immediately gets that it's being shunned. We just need to shun these right-wingers. That's where we need to start. So anyhow, you can check out the whole thing over at ThomHartmann.com. And if thanks so much for supporting our program. We really do appreciate it. It's all over at thomhartmann.com.
And welcome back. Ann Nelson is with us. She's the author of a new book, Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. It is absolutely brilliant. And some years ago, I've been doing this show for 17 years, and probably a decade or maybe even a little more than that ago, every year there's an annual convention in New York City that's put on by Michael Harrison and Talkers Magazine. It's sort of the official trade publication of the talk radio industry. And they have a lunch, a luncheon with a guest speaker and all that kind of stuff. And I found myself sitting next to one of the senior executives at Salem Radio Networks. And, we were talking radio, and I said, have you ever thought about putting a progressive on any of your stations? Because they've got, stations in pretty much all the major cities around the country. And he was like, oh, no, we would never do that. We're a Christian company. We were started as a Bible publishing company, and we still publish Bibles, and we would not put anybody on the air who's not a Christian. And I said, well, I'm a Christian, openly. And he said, oh, no, you can't be a liberal and be a Christian, a true Christian. And then changed the subject, or words to that effect. It's been some years. I don't remember the exact word for word, but it was damn close to that. And I've kind of always scratched my head about that conversation and about, what that was all about. And then in your book, I read that Salem is part of the Council for National Policy, or affiliated with them, or somehow associated with them. Tell us about their media strategy, please.
So, yes, Salem is a key partner for the Council for National Policy, and it's played, I believe, an important but largely hidden role in bringing Trump to power. The two founders and CEOs of Salem one of them has been the president of the Council for National Policy in the past, and the other has been a leading figure there. So the way it works is the Council for National Policy will have people who are strategists, say people like Wayrick and Viggory in the past, and other strategists moving into the present time, and they'll figure out what messages they're going to promote. Some of these are long-range messages, such as what they do on abortion. Democrats believe in abortion on demand up until the day of birth. Not true. Not true in the least, but it is the slogan that they've gotten mileage with, so they repeat it endlessly across their media platforms. And some people believe it. So that gets drummed in. They'll also have reactive messaging about day-to-day events. So, for example, during Black Lives Matter, the cities of the United States are living in a state of anarchy. You have to elect Trump in order to respond to it and have a peaceful life in your suburbs. But that message might change week to week. So Salem Media is fascinating. It's the biggest media organization you've never heard of for most people. And they distribute content to something like 3,000 radio stations across the country. A lot of my colleagues on the East Coast don't understand how powerful radio is in much of the country. But you get these stations, some of which are religious, some of which are what are called Christian contemporary music, some of them are right-wing talk, and they just broadcast this messaging across their platforms. There are other radio partners, the BOT Network, which is mostly in the Southwest, the American Family Radio Network, which is hugely homophobic and Islamophobic and virulent, and that's based in Tupelo, Mississippi, with over 100 stations. So they are all pumping out this uniform messaging to their audiences. Now, Salem has gone and multiplied its platforms. So it has outlets like the Daily Caller, which is an online platform for which Ginny Thomas, Mrs. Clarence Thomas, is a so-called correspondent. She's also a member of the Council for National Policy. So you have this kind of wraparound media effect going online, on radio, on Christian Broadcasting Network television, and many other outlets. so that people inside this media bubble may have no other idea of reality.
It's extraordinary. To what extent is Fox News and Cumulus and what used to be called Clear Channel is now iHeartRadio are the other, those are the two, I believe, largest radio networks in the country. And then Fox News, of course, with billionaire Rupert Murdoch, are they associated with the Council for National Policy?
So I've dug around in this. It's not entirely conclusive. But you have figures like Todd Starnes, who's been a member of the Council for National Policy. He's also been on Fox News. He has a very checkered history as a journalist. You have proxies, such as this duo called Diamond and Silk, who are favorites. They're supposed to be soliciting the African American voter for Trump. And they're connected. They can appear on Fox sometimes and not other times. But I don't think there's a direct correlation, and I don't see a direct correlation with the other companies you mentioned either. However, I do think that by the time you look at, go to the Salem Media website and look at their list of properties, and they include Regnery Publishing, which is the biggest right-wing book publishing house in the country, as well as feature film productions, music production, and many online outlets such as PJ Media, etc. And once you pump these into social media, you really get traction.
Yeah, it becomes a massive echo chamber of organizations that appear to be disparate, but in fact are all intertwined. I was surprised to see Kellyanne Conway's name on this. Her husband, George, just tweeted that Anonymous, the guy who wrote that op-ed a couple of years ago in the New York Times saying, we're holding back Donald Trump, don't worry, we're inside the administration, that he or she is going to be coming out soon, and I retweeted that with words to the effect of poop meat fan, it's something big is about to happen. But Kellyanne Conway, his wife, in the Council for National Policy, she's not a billionaire.
There are many people who are not billionaires in the group. They have different functions. So she was in the 2014 directory, which was published by the Southern Poverty Law Center. And for years, that was the only roster that researchers like me had access to. Now, there's been a treasure trove of internal documents that have been accessed and published. And I refer people to the Center for Media and Democracy, which has published a whole bunch of videos, which are extremely interesting from internal CNP meetings. And also Documented.net has published material that's related, it's overlapping. And so, boy howdy, you can see a lot of activities going on in these videos, including media operations, methods of challenging the vote on a state level, and one of my least favorite, which is COVID disinformation, which has been presented as a project at a Council for National Policy meeting.
I've been on the mailing list of FreedomWorks for years, going back to the Tea Party, and I've been getting, starting in mid-April, right after all these reports came out that the majority of people dying from COVID were African-American or Hispanic rather than white people, proportionate to the population. Suddenly there was all this stuff from FreedomWorks about, we got to open the economy, get back to work, come on, now. To what extent is the Koch network, which kicked off FreedomWorks to start the Tea Party, to what extent are they connected to the Council for National Policy? By the way, we've got about 45 seconds till we hit another break here.
Okay, Adam Brandon, who runs FreedomWorks, is on the executive committee of the Council for National Policy Action organization, which is their lobbying arm. So it's directly connected. The Koch brothers overlap, but not 100%.
Wow. And what about ALEC? You mentioned ALEC earlier.
ALEC is in for the count. Very active. The head of ALEC is a very active member of the Council for National Policy, and there's a lot of interaction among them and the Republican Attorneys General Association, RAGA. All of it pushing things on the state level.
Remarkable. We're talking with Ann Nelson. The book is Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. We'll be back with more of my conversation with Ann Nelson in our Conversations of Great Minds segment or hour here today. We'll be right back. Stay around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Ann Nelson is the author of the new book, Shadow Network, about the Council for National Policy, among other things. This is a remarkable story. And welcome back. Ann, can you fill us in a little more about how the Council for National Policy operates at the state level? I know, ALEC is a nationwide organization. They bring in state legislators to sit with lobbyists and work things out. In fact, we had Congressman Mark Pocan, a Democrat from Wisconsin, on this program, it seems like 6-8 years ago, as he was crashing an ALEC meeting and being dragged out. We discovered a Democrat or a liberal. But there's also there are state networks as well. There are discrete ones, in each state, and then there is a network of these. Is there not? And to what extent are these associated with the Council for National Policy?
Well, all I can say is that the heads of ALEC, as well as the State Policy Network, are very active members of the Council for National Policy. So again, this is a matter of coordination. And I've been studying it now for a few years, and I have friends who are prominent attorneys, and what they have explained to me is that some states have weaker legal systems than others, and I'm afraid that includes my home state of Oklahoma. So what you can do in those cases is propose state legislation, and for example, it might be about abortion, or it has been about abortion, or it might be about compromising the civil and political rights of the LGBT population, which has happened in various states, including Texas. And you get these laws passed, and then you get them replicated across state lines to friendly Republican states. You test them in the courts of states where they're going to have a good chance of being validated. And then you keep leveraging up and up the system and getting this kind of creep of erosion of our political and civil rights, state by state. And of course, part of the strategy has been to plant their supporters in the federal judiciary, and that has been happening under the Trump administration apace. A record number of their supporters planted in the federal judiciary, including the Supreme Court. So their stated goal is to remake American society in their image, which is not remotely the image of the American citizenry as it exists today.
Yeah, you mentioned de Tocqueville in your book at one point. His understanding of American society was quite different than theirs, it seems.
Yeah, I think that, for me, and I've studied a fair amount of American history, the beauty of the American idea is that this country was founded at a time when people were killing each other over religion in Europe and in England. And so the founders came to, their families came to the United States and looked for a way to live and let live. You practice your religion, whatever it is, as long as it doesn't encroach on me. And that is, in fact, what has happened. And as we've progressed as a nation, that idea of inclusion and tolerance has expanded as well. And that's what these people want to roll back.
Right. We don't want an Oliver Cromwell. They do, apparently. Ann Nelson is with us. Her book, Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. We'll be right back with more of our conversation in just a moment. Stick around. The Hidden History of Monopoly tells how Robert Bork, yeah, that guy from the Reagan era, transformed corporate America and destroyed the American dream.
Hey, we have a new video up for the supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com. I really enjoy doing these separate from what we're doing on the air because sometimes I can say things that would be impolitic or inappropriate to say on the air. Like the name of the website that I'm talking about in this video, and I lay it out and share it with you on the video. It's ratbleepingthecourts.com, and the bleeping, of course, is a word that you just can't say on the air that starts with F. And this website is just outing these judges that Donald Trump and the Federalist Society have been sending through Mitch McConnell's Senate like a friggin' assembly line, and how unqualified they are, how hateful they are, how aggressively they've worked to screw students, to deny. Well, one of them actually said that women who are on birth control pills, that should be reason to fire people. Right? I mean, it's just insane. You can check it out over at ThomHartmann.com.
Welcome back. We're talking with Ann Nelson about her book, Shadow Network. Ann, how... Actually, let me postpone that question for a second. In summary, it seems, what we have here with the Council for National Policy is a group devoted to establishing and then, once established, maintaining oligarchy in the United States. Would that be an overstatement?
I think so, and it's got two big components. One is the religious and social. So again, it's rolling back civil and political rights for a lot of Americans, women, LGBT, minorities, immigrants, etc. These are not to be equal citizens. The other part is all about the money. I'm convinced of it. You've got the DeVos family, which doesn't like investigations by the government of their business malpractice. You've got the Koch brothers who don't like environmental regulations that stop them from polluting our rivers and our air and our soil. And so they want to dismantle the government as something that stands in their way. And they also don't want to pay any taxes. And they especially don't want to pay any taxes that benefit anybody else, whether it's children, whether it's impoverished people, whether it's elders. So that means eroding and eventually eliminating social programs and the government agencies that administer them. And it sounds extreme, but my book has 1,000 footnotes. I think I've documented it thoroughly. It is harsh.
Yeah, you've certainly convinced me. This is like full-bore oligarchy. So, which raises the question: if Donald Trump, through his, I would say probably character flaws more than anything else, because I think that if he had handled the coronavirus appropriately, he'd probably be cruising to re-election right now. But if he loses terribly and the Senate is lost and the House is retained by Democrats, how is the Council for National Policy going to respond to this? Is this just another opportunity to go hard like they did against like they did against Bill Clinton and Barack Obama with their radio and media networks and everything else? I mean, what kind of response do you expect?
Well, they've floated a lot of ideas at their meetings, which we've just recently gotten access to, and they floated the idea of having Navy SEAL veterans helping to guard the polling places in urban areas. So they have looked at a lot of different approaches to voter suppression and discrediting the vote. In a recent meeting, they met with the Republican attorneys general to see if they can have state-level means of challenging the vote. And then I think, and again, I can't answer this definitively. I'm reading the tea leaves. But I think the whole purpose of packing the courts in the way that they've done is to mount every possible loophole, bizarre legal challenge that they can to thwart the will of the people.
And I asked you earlier why these people are doing this, and you just talked about, wanting less regulation, wanting more money. We talked about neo-Calvinism. Is there, beyond those things, kind of a divine right to rule, is there a governing philosophy here?
Well, Tom, I'm somebody with a foot in each culture. I go back to Oklahoma a few times a year. I've lived in New York City. And I do feel that there is a kind of regional resentment. Basically, nobody of importance in this group is from New York or Boston, right? It's like this regional resentment where they want to take back what they think is theirs. I do feel that there's a little macho element because it is a very male-dominated culture, even though there are prominent women in it. But, for example, Phyllis Schlafly was one of the founding members, and her organization is still very active in it.
She was a regular on this show, by the way. I used to debate her all the time.
Okay. You know whereof I speak.
Yes.
And I think that it's very interesting to trace that path from Phyllis Schlafly through Amy Coney Barrett and this whole idea that women achieve prominence by arguing for the domination over other women. I find that very problematic.
Yeah, and kind of breathtaking. So to summarize, because we're running out of time here, your book, Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. And we're talking about the Council for National Policy. What can we do about this?
Well, if Trump and the Republicans take the government in the election, very little. Right. And if they don't, we need to rethink, starting with the IRS and going on to creating media systems that really serve people in the middle of the country and don't allow this vacuum for them to be dominated by this misinformation. Those are the first two things on my list.
Absolutely brilliant. Ann Nelson, the book Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. Get it, read it, share it with your friends. Ann, thanks a lot for dropping by today. It's great talking with you.
Thanks so much, Tom.
My pleasure. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. It needs you. And it's too late to mail your ballot in, so figure out a way to get it there physically. Tag you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code TOM. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM.